All right, we've been working our way through the Gospel of Luke. And Luke's got some wonderful stuff we don't find in any other Gospels. All right, his Gospel has unique kinds of things in it, particularly when it comes to the parables that Jesus told. So last couple of weeks we've been looking at parables, right? We had a parable about a fig tree. We had a parable about a guy who was walking down the road and got beat up by robbers, and see who helped him and who didn't help him. Today we're going to hear another parable. And if someone said you have to choose, you can only have one parable out of the whole Bible, this is the one I would pick, right? I think this one, more than any other, carries the whole essence of the gospel. Now let me give a quick reminder here for what a parable is and what a parable is not, all right? It's not a story to illustrate something to make it clear. That's called an illustration or a story. And those are good things. It's not an allegory. An allegory is where you've got something where this person represents God, and this person represents us, and this represents other things. Now, sometimes Jesus would tell stories as illustrations. Sometimes Jesus would use allegories to help us understand our relationship between us and God. And sometimes Jesus would tell parables. But they're different things. Right? An intention of a parable, Jesus will talk about this, the intention of a parable is not to make things clear for people. All right? The intention of a parable is to create some dissonance, to say, whoa, that's not right. A parable is not so people say, oh, now I get it. The intention of a parable is to say, what? That's not right. That doesn't make sense. I've never thought about it that way. I'm going to have to rethink this whole thing. That's what a parable is designed to do. So let's take Luke chapter 15. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling. They were saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners. He eats with them." So Jesus told them a parable. Actually, we're going to hear three parables. They all have the same point. It's telling the same story three different ways. All right? First one is this. Now, which of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, will not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he's found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And he comes home and calls all his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. So Jesus starts with a question, right? Which of you would abandon your flock to go seek the lost? And the answer, the people listening would say, none of us. That's crazy talk, right? A good shepherd would not abandon his flock, all right? It's bad enough losing one sheep. You don't want to lose the whole herd, right? That doesn't make sense. If you're a good shepherd, you stick with your flock. Your job is to protect them, so you better protect them. This shepherd who went off and left his 99 unattended is a foolish shepherd. So he tells another story. Or what woman, having 10 coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together all her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, I found the coin that was lost." Just so I tell you, there's joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now we get that. If we lose something, we search it out, right? I am forever putting down my cell phone and can't figure out where I put it, and I can't call it to find out where it is. So I have to have Diane call my phone so I can find out where my phone is. When we lose something, we get that. We search it out. And when we find it, we are relieved that we have found that which was lost. But we don't usually throw a party, right? I found my phone. Oh, everyone come on over. We're going to have dinner because I found my phone. You're not going to throw a party that costs 10 coins because you found your one last coin and now you got no money, all right? It's worse than having lost a coin. It's way out of proportion to throw a party over finding one coin. The woman was foolish. He says, I'm going to tell you another story. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, traveled to a distant country where he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. He gladly would have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Then he came to himself. He said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up. I'll go to my father. I'll say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' And so he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran and he put his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to the slaves, 'Quickly, bring a robe, the best one. Put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Get the fatted calf and kill it. Let's eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found.' And they began to celebrate." All right. Now the story's not over yet, but let me really pause here, this part of the story. Most of you heard that story before? You guys heard the story? All right. So the trouble is, sometimes when we hear a story so many times, we forget that the very premise of the whole story is crazy, right? I mean, there's no father in his right mind who would disperse his entire inheritance, everything he had spent his whole life working for, and give it to an irresponsible child. This father knew his kid. The kid grew up with him. He knew this kid was irresponsible. No responsible father would give it to a child who he knew would squander it away. That's the epitome of foolishness, right? Which I think is the whole point of the story. That which appears to be foolishness is actually something else. It's something we call grace, an experience of grace, extravagant, prodigal, undeserved love. You have to remember, what was it that prompted Jesus to tell this story, right? It was criticism he was getting because he was hanging out with the wrong people. Jesus wasn't distinguishing between the good people and the bad people, between the righteous and the lost. He was treating them all alike. Even the sinners, he treated them as if they had value. Too often when we read this story, we make it about the son. In fact, we call it the story of the prodigal son. That's not titled that in the Bible. But we make it the story about a son who runs away and squanders his resources and sees the error of his ways and returns. But the father welcomes him back before he can even make his well-rehearsed confession, right? Now, I don't know if the son was really sorry or not, or maybe he was just tired of eating pig food, right? But it really doesn't matter in this story, because the story is not about the son. Even though we often make it that. It's not a story about a son. This is a story about a father. Remember? All three stories, right? It's a story about a shepherd who had 100 sheep. It's a story about a woman who had 10 coins. It's a story about a father who had 2 sons. And the shepherd, the woman, the father, all are extravagant with undeserved love, with a celebration which they call grace. So what does that mean for us? It means that our identity as children of God is not dependent on what we've done or what we're doing or even what we're going to do, right? Nothing can separate us from the love of God. God is crazy in love with us, truly, madly, deeply in love with us. And that is the pure gospel. Jesus told these parables to ask people, say, which of you would go to such lengths to search and find and welcome back and celebrate? And truth be told, few of us would go to the extremes. It's foolishness as we look at these stories. But Jesus says, but God would. God does. Even now, relentless in his mercy and grace and love for us. Went to a movie the other day based on a book that came out a couple years ago called The Shack. How many guys read the book? Anyone read the book, The Shack? Anyone seen the movie yet? Okay, you should go see the movie. They do a good. I'm always a little worried when the movie comes out after a book. Are they going to do a good job with it? But I think they did a very good job with it. Powerful story. If you don't know this story, it's a story about a guy named Mac, who's in the midst of a faith crisis. Somehow he has to come to terms with the death of his daughter. Tragic, awful death of his daughter. And how does he find God in the midst of that? Before this loss that comes and rips his whole family apart, Mac and his family, had this relationship with God where they used the term Papa to talk to God. His wife family had that, and that's something they taught their kids too. Because you can talk, God loves you. You can talk to God as easily as a child talks to a loving parent, to call God Papa, and that's what they would use. Jesus did the same thing, right? Jesus used the word Abba. That's an Aramaic word for Papa. It's a way to say, he says, when you pray, don't say, "Oh, most merciful, high God, creator of the universe." Say, Papa. Use this language of this intimate, close relationship. That's how Jesus said, that's how I want you to pray. It's a name that connotates closeness and tender care. But those days were gone for Mac. He did not experience the love of God. In fact, he thought that God had abandoned him. He is angry. He's deep in the pain that comes when you lose someone dear to you. But he responds to this mysterious invitation, and he journeys to the shack where he meets Papa. Papa invited him to come. And God appears to him in many different forms, depending on what it is that Mac needs to see at any given time. One of the forms that God appears is sort of this kindly black woman, a person who had befriended Mac when he was a child. And Mac begins this process of healing, of letting go of judging others and being loved. There's lots of powerful moments in the movie, in the book. But one of them comes when Mac is desperately trying to figure out how it is that a God who is powerful and all-knowing and a God who says, loves me, allow for such suffering to happen in the world. How could he do that? How could he abandon his daughter? How could he abandon him when he needed God the most and he felt so alone? And he just says, God, I don't get it. Tell me what this means. And Papa responds, and she says, just because I work incredible good out of unspeakable tragedies doesn't mean that I've orchestrated the tragedies. Don't ever assume that my using something means that I caused it or need it to accomplish my purposes. That just leads to false notions about me. Grace doesn't depend on suffering to exist. But where there's suffering, you will find grace. This is powerful stuff. But my favorite line in the movie, in the book, is where God reminds Mac that she is especially fond of him. And she said, I am especially fond of you. And as time goes on, she mentions there's other people who she's especially fond of. And pretty soon Mac gets a little annoyed. He says, is there anyone you're not especially fond of? All right? And God says, nope, it's just the way it is. All right? Extravagant, prodigal, undeserved, foolish love that will not let go, no matter what. That's God. Love that has a power to redeem, to bring hope, to bring light in the midst of the darkest darkness. But sometimes we forget, especially when times get hard. And that's when we need to hear it more than ever. So I want to make sure everyone hears it today. So I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to say this. God is especially fond of you. Right? Turn to the person next to you. God is especially fond of you. All right. It's true. God is especially fond of you. But let's go back to Jesus' story here. Remember, the story, I told you the story wasn't over yet. So he's telling this parable to the Pharisees who were accusing him of being gracious to sinners, of not recognizing bad people or treating them all alike. So Jesus comes back to the story. He says, now let me get back to why I told the story in the first place. He says, now the elder son, remember there were two sons. The elder son was in the field. When he came home and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked, what's going on? Slave replied, your brother has come. Your father's killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound. The brother became angry. He refused to go in. Father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father. He says, listen, after all these years I've worked for you like a slave. I never disobeyed one of your commands. Yet you've never given me even a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. This son of yours comes back, who's devoured your property with prostitutes, and you kill the fatted calf for him. Father said, son, you're always with me. All that is mine is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead, but now is alive. He was lost, but he's been found.
I belong to you. I belong to you. Abba, Father, Abba, I belong to you. I belong to you. Abba, Father God. I kneel now and feel how I felt here before. This pausing is causing my heart to explore. Why when I'm weary so often you seem far away, still I will say, Abba, I belong to you. I belong to you. Abba, Father, Abba, I belong to you. I belong to you. Abba, Father God.
That's the gospel. Amen. The song says, you never let go. It's another way of saying this kind of thing, of this extravagant, foolish God that will never let go no matter what. So let's invite you to rise. Let's sing this together.